Hey guys, it's Eric, also known as Minefield, also known as Vapor Chase on YouTube, and I would like to talk to you about people. See, when you start with electronic cigarettes, one thing you're going to probably run into is some resistance from people. People who don't believe it's going to work, or people who think that it's something other than what it is. And what I'd like to talk about today is some of the things that you're probably going to hear from some of these people, and some responses you can give to them, some facts, some studies, and so on that you can point them to show them that it's not what they think. Just to help clear up some misconceptions that some people do have. I mean, some of it is born of ignorance, some of it is born of rumors that they've heard from people, or things that people have told them, or things they've read on the net or elsewhere from people who are just unreasonably against electronic cigarettes for whatever reason. So let's start with some of the things that you're probably going to hear. No, not really. Smoking refers to a very particular sort of activity, which is smoking. Lighting up a cigarette, taking a drag, and inhaling and exhaling smoke. That's why it's called smoking. Vaping is vapor. That's why it's called vaping. It's vapor, not smoke. No, actually it's not by half or even a quarter. Cigarettes are harmful because not only does the tobacco itself contain a lot of chemicals that you're inhaling, but the combustion of the tobacco itself also creates additional chemicals. When you smoke a cigarette, you're smoking more than 4,000 chemicals and taking that into your lungs, more than 60 of which are known carcinogens, and many of which may or may not be carcinogens. But that's the main problem, and that's why smoking is so bad for you. There are so many ingredients in it that can cause cancer or otherwise damage your health. Vaping, however, only contains a few simple ingredients. There's propylene glycol, which is pharmaceutical grade, vegetable glycerin, also pharmaceutical grade. There is nicotine in a propylene glycol and or vegetable glycerin base, also pharmaceutical grade, both the PG, the VG, and the nicotine, which is typically about 99.6% pure or higher. And it will contain food-grade flavorings. And these food-grade flavorings are generally FDA approved. They're safe for human consumption. So there are a lot fewer ingredients in electronic cigarettes, in the liquid that is used in electronic cigarettes, and none of them are known carcinogens. Not as such. It is not healthy, I will say that much. It is not healthy. It does contain a few aspects of it that are not particularly good for you. It is a vasoconstrictor, which means it shrinks your veins. It is known to contribute to heart disease, so it's not really great in that aspect. But it can also contribute to improved concentration. You can concentrate better, you can focus better, you can get things done a little bit better. There have been studies that have shown that nicotine improves concentration. That's not to say that you should be using this or considering it as any kind of a health benefit or otherwise. It is not great, but on the list of things in tobacco cigarettes that are bad for you, nicotine is way down there on the list. There are far more harmful ingredients in a tobacco cigarette than in an electronic cigarette. The reason that nicotine gets the bad rap that it does is because it's simply convenient to blame nicotine, because it's much more complicated to explain why the other stuff that's in there, most of which is unpronounceable, is so bad for you. Nicotine is the most visible ingredient in tobacco, so that's the ingredient that gets demonized. But it is not the worst component in there, not even close to being the worst component in a tobacco cigarette. As I said, it's not great for you, but it's not as bad as most people seem to think it is. It's not the evil in a cigarette. The smoke and all the chemicals and all that stuff, that's the evil. No, actually we're not. There have been some studies that have been done recently that have shown that the air quality from somebody who is exhaling vapor is actually not significantly altered. The nicotine that you exhale is almost negligible. Most of the nicotine that is in the vapor that you inhale stays in your body. Most of it is absorbed by the buccal tissue in your mouth, and the rest of it, or most of the rest of it anyway, gets absorbed by your lungs. What is exhaled is negligible and is unlikely to cause any kind of health issues from anybody who is in the vicinity of you exhaling your secondhand vapor. There are a couple of studies you might want to look at. One is the IVAQS, IVAQS, the Indoor Vapor Air Quality Study. This is a study that has been specifically tailored to test the quality of air indoors from somebody who has been vaping. And it tests for any kind of secondhand vapor problems, any carcinogens, any harmful things in the air from somebody exhaling vapor. And you'll find, if you go there to ivax.com, you'll find that they have found there is really no danger in it whatsoever. There is a secondary test that was conducted by Flavor Art, which is a major flavoring manufacturer in Italy. It's called the Clearstream study, and it pretty much came to the same conclusion. So you can check out URLs for both of those studies down below in the links, and you can read their papers and everything like that. So you can get a good idea of how these really are not very harmful at all. In fact, for people who are just around you vaping, it's really not harmful at all. Not as such, no, we're not quitting. Now, mind you, it is actually easier to quit nicotine and vaping altogether when you're on electronic cigarettes than it is to quit cigarettes themselves. Vaping allows you to tailor your nicotine levels to a pretty fine degree if you want to go to the trouble of making your own e-liquids, because then you can control exactly how much nicotine is going into your juices, and you can cut it down over a period of time, and that period of time, of course, you can choose for yourself. So it's really not that hard at all. I do have a friend of mine that is going through the same thing, or will be in the new year, and he's going to do the same thing. Month by month, he's going to drop his nicotine level by 1 milligram per milliliter, and he's going to see if he can get off it entirely. For myself, I really don't have any desire to do that. But that's the good thing about electronic cigarettes, is that it lets you be in charge of your addiction. Whether you want to stay with electronic cigarettes, because this is a harm reduction measure. It's not intended to be a quit smoking aid. It's intended to reduce the harm involved in maintaining the habit. And that's what electronic cigarettes are. It is a harm reduction strategy. It allows us to continue our habit and even enjoy our habit while reducing the harm that it does to us. Because we know cigarettes are bad for us. We know that we've tried to quit. Most of us, I'm sure, have tried to quit probably numerous times using numerous methods. And many of us, probably most of us, have been unsuccessful. But electronic cigarettes have a much, much higher success rate than nicotine replacement therapy products like gums and patches and so on, who generally, those only have a success rate, a long-term success rate, of under 10%. Now, we don't really have any solid numbers on electronic cigarettes, but we're pretty sure it's above 50%, probably much higher than that. Nevertheless, I don't think any study has been done as to the actual success rate of electronic cigarettes using juices that contain nicotine. I've seen ones that have tested people without nicotine, and they've had a pretty good success rate even so, but not as good as with nicotine, because that's really kind of the key. However, it is not about quitting. It's really just about an alternative to smoking that is safer than smoking, and is a harm reduction strategy. Again, if you want to quit, it is easier to do so from a platform of electronic cigarettes than it is from traditional cigarettes. So if you want to use it as a quit smoking strategy, it's easier to do that. Well, anybody who has been a smoker knows that that's a rather silly question to ask, because for most of us, quitting is not that easy. The problem isn't the physical addiction to nicotine. That's actually relatively easy, or at least comparatively easy, to break yourself of. The problem is the psychological addiction to the rituals, to the act of smoking, to picking up a cigarette, lighting it, taking drags, blowing out smoke. There are all kinds of cues with smoking that we are addicted to, that we ingrain into our daily routines and into our lives. And these things, these rituals, are so ingrained into many of our activities because we tend to associate many of our activities with smoking, whether it's going for a walk or after a meal or first thing in the morning or before bed or wherever. Anytime these activities are engaged in, they trigger the desire for a cigarette because they are the things that we do typically with a cigarette in our hands. And the problem with quitting is not the nicotine itself, it's the physical habit, the ritual. That is what is so hard to break, and that's why there is such a high rate of recidivism in those who try to quit cold turkey. Those who have quit for a week, 2 weeks, a month, 2 months, 3 months, long after the nicotine has actually left their body, they still crave cigarettes. The problem is they're not craving the nicotine, they're craving the physical habit, the actual acts of smoking. That is what is so hard to quit, and that's why those who have quit for months or even a year or 2 years or whatever can so easily fall back into the habit. It's a psychological thing, not a physiological thing. That is what is so hard to quit. And that is why electronic cigarettes are so successful, because they successfully replicate all of the aspects of our habit, except for the lighting it on fire, of course, which we don't need to do anymore. But beyond that, the actual ritual itself, picking it up, taking a drag, we see the physical manifestation of what seems like smoke, except it's vapor. We get all of the visual cues, all of the physical cues, all of the actions of smoking. That is why it's so successful, because it mimics everything we need out of a cigarette, and the other methods don't. And that's why they aren't so successful. The problem with those methods is that they don't cater to the whole addiction. They cater to the nicotine only, and the problem is that is the least part of the addiction that needs to be treated. The longer term has to be treated through physical rituals. You need to be able to pick something up and puff on it and blow out a visible stream of what looks like smoke. You need to feel something in your lungs. For most of us, need to feel that throat hit from the nicotine. And those patches, the gums, the little inhalers, they really don't do it. They don't cater to the whole addiction. Electronic cigarettes do. And that's why they just don't work. But more to the point, they're not necessarily safer. All they have is that they contain pharmaceutical-grade nicotine. Well, this contains pharmaceutical-grade nicotine too. The difference with this from the other things is that this lets me do everything I did with a cigarette except light it on fire. But the gums, the patches, they're passive for the most part. Gums you chew, that's fine, but that's just like chewing gum, and it's not associated with smoking. Patches, those are passive. You just stick them on and you leave them there. You're not treated to any of the physical actions that you do when you smoke. The inhalers, well, that's a little bit closer, and I even tried those for a little while. The problem is they're rather terrible. They taste like inhaling chalk dust, and they don't have any flavor. They don't produce any kind of physical cues like smoke. They're just not very good, as far as I'm concerned. Some people might have had success, and if so, that's fantastic, but for me, they just never worked. And also, there's the fact that most of us, or many of us, don't necessarily have the kind of willpower that's needed to quit using one of those nicotine replacement therapy products. On the other hand, electronic cigarettes usually don't require much, if any, willpower. That's the strength of electronic cigarettes. So those are some of the things that you're likely to encounter from people who might see what you're doing and ask what it is, and maybe, for whatever reason, take offense to them. Now, these answers to these questions aren't necessarily going to satisfy everybody's curiosity. Those who are just mildly curious, or maybe who aren't smokers but don't necessarily have anything against things that are designed to get you off of cigarettes, are probably going to find these answers rather helpful. Unfortunately, you are going to run into the sort of crowd that we call the ants. The anti-nicotine and tobacco zealots. Those are the people who are against tobacco and nicotine in any form, shape, or color with an unreasonable, almost religious fervor. And these are the people that are not going to be convinced no matter what you have to say if it conflicts with their personal worldviews. For those people, it's not really worth arguing with because they're not going to change their minds about it. They're set in their ways, they believe one particular way, and you're not going to convince them otherwise, and they're going to continue being against nicotine and tobacco, even if some of the reasoning is spurious. However, for those people, you can just kind of ignore them. For the rest, you can educate, and hopefully this will help you do so. In the meantime, my name is Eric, this has been For Vast Vapor, and happy vaping.